Thank you, Roy. Good morning.
Good morning.
On behalf of the church's tech department, I would like to thank all the people who have been working so very hard to put the bulletin together. I especially love this section, which is the order of worship. It helps us track things better and helps us time things out better. So those of you who have been working very hard on that, we very much appreciate it. I'm going to let you guys in on a little bit of a trade secret with ministers, kind of peek behind the curtain a little bit. There's a prayer I say every week before I come up. And I go back in the office while I'm looking over my notes and I'm kind of mentally preparing a little bit. And the prayer always starts off the same way. Dear Lord, please do not let me mess this up. It's the way it starts every week. It has nothing to do with confidence or preparedness or my physical or mental or emotional condition. I just really want to do a good job. And so I accept the limitations of being a human being. And every week I go back there, or every time I speak, I go back there and I start off, Dear Lord, please don't let me mess this up. I say that today specifically because there is the first line in my notes that I have really debated about whether or not to share, because the other trade secret is it is never a good idea to let the audience know of your condition, because you don't want their perception of you to become altered. So if you come up here and the first thing you say is, "Oh guys, I'm so sorry, I've got a cold today," it's going to be a little bit off. That immediately alters your perception on their speaking, and it makes you feel obligated to come up and kind of give them kudos afterwards, despite their condition going on. And so the first line of my note is, I am terrified for more than one reason. I am terrified because there's always a hook, there's always a gimmick with my lessons. There's always something going on in the background for me to reach out to the audience and kind of pull you guys in. It's usually a song lyric or a quote or a comic book or any one of the trademark Tim Junkins, hey, this is totally a Tim sermon. It's got that Tim stamp on it. And I'm terrified specifically because I'm operating outside of my comfort zone today. I didn't even have an opening joke. It's really kind of a bummer. Because I always like to have an opening joke, but because of the nature of today's sermon and because of what this week represents in our nation, it was extremely important for me not to open with a joke this morning. It was extremely important for me. I was 19 years old, and I was a freshman in college. No, I'm sorry, I was 18 years old. Sorry, I'm doing the math wrong there. I was 18 years old. I was a freshman in college. It was my first month there. I had left an 8 o'clock class, and I had gone back to my dorm room, and I had slept for a couple hours because I had nothing between that and chapel at 11 a.m. So there was this glorious 2-hour period where I got to go back to my room, and I got to go to sleep. I lived on the top floor of the administration building because back then the top floor was actually the boys' dormitory, the next floor was classrooms, the next floor was the administrative offices, the chapel, and the cafeteria. And so every morning at 11 o'clock, we would congregate for a very brief 15 to 30 minute service, depending on who was speaking. And so 10:50 rolls around, I want to make sure I get a good seat. I walk right out to the elevator, I get in, and I start going down. And there's always those elevator-based conversations you hear, where clearly you're missing something. The people in the elevator, they're talking to each other, and they say something, and it doesn't quite catch the ear right. I'm hearing something about airplanes. I'm hearing something about New York City. And I don't understand what it is. And outside of the chapel, there was a mounted TV, which was, at that time, tuned to... we had a very limited television cable selection. And it was normally tuned to the school's channel. It was just this kind of rotating screen of announcements. It was just... hey, the volleyball team's playing 8 o'clock tonight, be there, go Highlanders, or whatever my mascot was. I kind of forget what it was at this point. And so I get out of the elevator, and that TV is tuned to one of the major news networks. I don't really care to recall whether or not it was CNN or Fox, because I don't like getting into that flame war with people. But it was tuned to one of the major news networks. And you have to understand that the lobby has never been this full before. There are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of people who have not gone into the chapel, but are standing and staring silently at the television, of course, at what is now referred to as the 9/11 attacks. They're gaping at the footage of the wrecked towers, and there's a very small part of me that is actually horrified to think that I slept through something so significant. But it was college, I wasn't always in communication. And of course, being from this area, I immediately flew into a panic, and I ran back up to my room and I started calling people and trying to get through, and all the lines were busy because my brother actually was working in DC at the time when, of course, the Pentagon attack happened. And so I'm terrified for more than one reason, because I'm approaching this from a somber perspective, and also I never immerse myself in the topic as much as I do this week, because September was a really bad month for me. Because it was my first time away from home. The September 11th attacks happened, and then if you've lived in this area for a significant amount of time, you also know we had a really bad tornado season that year. One of which went through College Park, Maryland, into Laurel, where I lived, up my street, through my neighbor's house, and through the corner of my parents' house, where my mom, my dad, and my younger brother were in the basement. And then, of course, I get around to December, and my grandmother goes into the hospital, and she doesn't come out. And I'm sitting with my dad in the lobby of the hospital, and we always have this attitude of like, hey, at least the year's over. At least we're past this. And of course, the one thing I always talk about is our life is never exactly like that. I did a sermon on it on New Year's a couple of years ago about how we have this fake mentality about, oh, we get past this mystical threshold, we're in January 1st, we're in the next year. It's time for everything to get better and everything to stay good forever and ever. And it never turns out like that. And so what we're looking at today is Hebrews chapter 11. I have to very, very quickly dive into the sermon here because we're on the cusp of my emotional state, and it is important for me to get into this. What we are going to be looking at today is, there are two quotes I want to put forth for you today, and they are the most polar opposite quotes ever. One of them is from a person of the French military, and one of them is from a comedian living in Los Angeles today. And so I'm going to do the military one first. My younger brother recommended this amazing book, and if you're a World War II buff, if you're a history buff, I cannot recommend it more. It's called The Liberator. And it is about one man's journey from the beaches of Sicily all the way to the gates of Dachau, the first and largest concentration camp. And it's this really amazing story about this man and the military process leading up to this. Just absolutely amazing book. And about 3/4 of the way through the book, this quote is presented. In addressing American veterans of World War II in 2001, Michael DiPaolo, a French consular officer, remarked, "We live in a free world today because in 1945, the forces of imperfect goodness defeated the forces of near perfect evil." The one thing that the Liberator does, the one thing that the author talks about, is he does not sugarcoat war. So I will warn you about that. The content is extremely graphic, and some of the decisions are extremely amoral and gray, even from the German to the American sides of things. Difficult choices have to be made, and people have to be left behind, and people live, and people die. And it's one of those things where this quote admits that we as people, despite being on the fact of good, despite being on the fact of fighting for freedom and righteousness, we as people are not perfect. And Hebrews chapter 11 is an amazing example of that. So we're looking at Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verse 1. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous. When God spoke well of his offerings, and by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commanded as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of righteousness that is in keeping with faith. We'll continue on in just a moment. There's one thing I focus dearly on in my sermons. There's one thing I do not tolerate. I do not tolerate pessimism in my sermons. I don't. I'm not that person. I'm not that guy. You blame it on TV, you can blame it on music, you can blame it on comic books, all you want, but I'm just too optimistic of a person to stand here and talk about atrocities of World War II and September 11th and not end on a more positive note than when we first entered. And so we look at all the bad. We look at all the bad in the world. We look at the connections that are made. We look at the footnotes of history. Wednesday, a boy or a girl will turn 12 years old. They'll turn 12 years old because they were born into a world on that day. And their parents struggled with the notion of how can we bring children into this world. And more importantly, we look at the idea of footnotes of history. I am not going to pretend to be old enough to understand the difficulties of the Vietnam War or World War II or the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. I'm not going to pretend that I have an emotional connection to that. It is a footnote in history to me. And to that 12-year-old who celebrates their birthday this Wednesday, this will be a footnote in history to them. They have no emotional connection. Even people who are graduating from high school right now. I do this to mess with my friends, and I guess I will be a little humorful today. I'll throw in a little humor. I call it the shotgun of old. Because what I do is I go, because we were watching a movie last night and they were playing a song in a flashback that took place in 1999. It was this song that was extremely popular and nobody remembers the name of the band. And I'm in the kitchen pouring a drink and I hear the song and I lean out and I go, hey, fun fact, this song debuted 14 years ago. You're old. And so it's this thing where we look at these people. We look at these people, we look at this child who was born on that day, who will look at this and it will be a footnote of history to them. And to say that they will not experience their own emotional trauma, they will not experience something in their lives akin to this, is probably an unrealistic goal. And it's unfortunate. And so we look at those children and we say, what is the point? What is the point of bringing them into this world if all they're going to do is face disappointment and heartache and tragedy, and to see people live and to see people die before what we perceive as their time? And so we look at Hebrews 11, and a similar and ironic question you can ask about Hebrews 11 is, why are there so many examples? Because the funny thing about sermons is, as soon as I dive into the scripture, most of us as people are intelligent enough to connect the dots in our mind. I start talking about Hebrews 11. I talk about people who are faithful to God. I could literally come up here and be like, hey guys, be faithful to God. All right, have a good Sunday. Let's wrap it up. And it's this thing where we look at it and we see example after example after example. The passage literally reads, by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith. And we're going to keep going because we need these examples. We need an idea of optimism in our lives. We need an example of godly people. That is why there are so many examples in Hebrews chapter 11. And that's why I'm going to keep reading. Continuing on verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sands on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. It's a hard truth to swallow as we get into the second act. Out of 3, I'll give you guys a timetable here. We're more than halfway through at this point. But as we get into this, it's a hard truth to swallow. That all these people who live by faith, all these people who followed God, all these people lived here, admitted to themselves that they were strangers on earth. You know, we sing in the songs, this world's not my home, I'm just passing through. We look at it, and we look at these people who set example after example after example. And more importantly, if you go all the way back to the beginning of Hebrews 11, it talks about the idea of how faith is the evidence of things unseen, about how we struggle with this idea of faith. We struggle with this connection with God because the world tells us differently. The world can sit around, plug its fingers in its ears, going la 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 la, talking about how there's nothing better out there. And like I said, you can blame it on whatever you want, but I'm just too optimistic of a person to believe that. Which is funny, because I'm super pessimistic at work, but I believe in something better, I do. And so it's one of those things where I have to believe that there's something better out there. I have to believe, despite the fact that we as people are not perfect, despite the fact that I try very hard every day to be perfect. I try hard, and I come close, but I'm not quite there. I'm not close. You can laugh at that. And so, it's one of those things where we look to these examples and we see by faith, by faith, by faith. By faith, God commanded them to do this, and they did that, and they were rewarded for it. And it's this thing where we look at these tragedies. We look at things like September 11th. We look at things where innocent people are killed, and they are ripped from their lives, and people lose loved ones. And we look at that and we go, why? And I will not shy away from the fact that I struggled very hard that latter half of 2001 in my relationship with God. There were some frank and angry conversations between myself and the Lord in which I used less than flattering language. I spent months talking to people on the phone from my current church trying to figure out why do these things keep happening? Why did my neighbor lose their home to a tornado? Why did my parents have to go through this trauma? Why, and it continues on, especially in this area. We live kind of at the epicenter of the world, being here in the Washington, D.C. area. And so the next year, 2002, was the D.C. sniper. And I had a friend's younger brother going to the middle school located next to the church that I went to when that child was shot. And so you sit there and you look at all the bad and you say, why? Why, God? Why do we do this? Why do we keep going? Why do we press on? People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country when they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice, who had embraced the promises, was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. It just keeps going from there. This idea of legacy, this idea of lineage, this idea that the reason that we press on is so we can make a better future. I'm going to jump very briefly to this quote. This is from a Los Angeles comedian, which was written in April of this year, following the Boston bombings. I remember when 9/11 went down, my reaction was, well, I've had it with humanity. But I was wrong. I don't know what's going to be revealed. I don't know what's going to be revealed to be behind all this mayhem. One human insect or a poisonous mass of broken sociopaths. But here's what I do know. If it's one person or 100 people, that number is not even a fraction of the percent of the population on this planet. You watch the videos of the carnage and there are people running towards the destruction to help out. This is a giant planet and we're lucky to live on it, but there are prices and penalties incurred for the daily miracle of existence. One of them is every once in a while the wiring of a tiny sliver of the species gets snarled and they are pointed towards darkness. But the vast majority stands against the darkness, and like white blood cells attacking a virus, they dilute and weaken and eventually wash away the evildoers, and more importantly, the damage they wreak. We would not be here if humanity were inherently evil. We'd have eaten ourselves alive a long time ago. So when you spot violence or bigotry or intolerance or fear, or just garden variety misogyny, hatred or ignorance, just look it in the eye and think, the good outnumber you, and we always will. We as the people of God, we have a responsibility. We are tasked with the glorious responsibility of trying to be better than the world. I say trying because we're not always going to succeed. Like I said, I come up here and I spout off optimism and joy and hope for the future, and kind of a jerk at work sometimes. But at the core of it, I believe that there has to be something better out there. And the reason I believe that is because in Hebrews chapter 11, by faith, it just keeps going on and on and on as God demonstrates time and time again that there is potential in each and every one of us to impact the world in such a positive way. When I was teaching Bible study last week, I really hammered home the point that even if you go out and you change one person's life, if you impact one person positively, you have done what God has called you to do. We talked about the 99 sheep and how one gets lost, and wouldn't you leave those 99 who are already safe to go find the one that was lost and to bring them back? Wouldn't you go out and do everything you could? Wouldn't you celebrate so much more when you get that one person back from being lost in the darkness? Wouldn't you rejoice with so much more compassion than those who are already saved? The one thing I always strive to be when I am in a church, because I love the church and I love the people in the church, and I'm crazy about being here and doing the best that I can, but the one thing I do not like is the idea of people sitting around in a circle agreeing with each other. Yeah, we're going to heaven, aren't we? Yes, we certainly are. And just sitting around in a circle and agreeing with each other and talking about how great we are and how we do good things and we're good people, but without that action, without the idea. And you don't have to run towards tragedy, because you do look at footage from Boston and New York in 2001, and you look at film reels from like World War II, and you see people who are running towards the devastation, and I look at that and I go, I wish I could be that person. I I wish I could be that person, but I don't know if the situation comes up, if I could demonstrate that courage, so I will do what I can to be godly. I will go out and I will encourage people, and I will demonstrate to them that if you believe, pardon me, if you believe in the Word of God, if you believe in the power of Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, look to these examples and know that there is something better out there. I do not encourage you to blindly believe. I do not encourage you to take my word for it. I encourage you to know that there is something better out there. To have the assurance spoken of. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. It's a tough pill to swallow. It's the one thing I don't sugarcoat about. Is when dealing with your personal relationship between yourself and God, the world sits there and tries time and time and time and again to hammer you down, to set forth examples, and to put that attitude in your head that it infected me back in 2001. That idea that maybe there isn't a God out there, or maybe if He is out there, maybe He doesn't love us that much. It was this infection in my mind, in my body, in my soul, and I could not take it, and I went to the breaking point. I went to the breaking point where I was ready to throw it all away and just move back home and do something else with my life. And I went and I prayed on it, and I focused, and I got through it because of God. I'm a strong person spiritually. I'm a strong optimist. I believe in the power of prayer. I believe in the power of people. I believe in the Word of God. But that is not enough. You look at the pastors from me all the way to the mega churches. You look at the people who are speaking to tens of thousands of people on a weekly basis, and they are so charismatic, and they are so good at their job, and they are so knowledgeable in the Scripture. But it is not good enough. We have to make that connection with God. We have to go forth to God and say, God, I could be the best I am at what I do, and it's not enough. I need that connection. Because as soon as my strength falters, as soon as my confidence dwindles, that's it for me. I'm out, I'm done, I've got nothing left. And so I need to turn to you, Lord, and I need to say, Lord, empower me. Empower me to be a better person. More importantly, empower me to get through this. That is the second line of the Tim Junkins minister prayer. It starts with, Dear Lord, please do not let me mess this up. It continues with, please let me get through this. Don't let me get through this because it's an obligation. Don't let me get through this because it's a chore or because it's something I don't enjoy doing. It's not the same prayer as work. Work is a totally different prayer. When I say, Lord, please let me get through the day, that's a time-based issue. Here is a constitutional-based issue. It is an endurance-based issue. It is me needing to get through this because I know there's something that has to be said. And so I choose to make that connection to faith. And if you're here today and you are also looking to make that connection to faith, if you're looking to bridge the gap between yourself and Jesus Christ and become baptized in His name, if you were looking to further empower yourself, if there is something missing, if you're a follower of Jesus, like I said, I was a baptized Christian. I was going to college to become a minister, and I was ready to walk away from it. We go through it too, despite the fact that we like to put on a tough face and not talk about it, and talk about how great and strong we are as people. So take comfort in the fact that I am not perfect, that I falter, and I have to turn to God and say, God, please empower me to be a better follower of you. I ask you to contemplate these things as we stand and sing the song of invitation.